The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the New York City skyline, bathing a modest brick apartment complex in Queens with a warm, golden light. Inside a small, white-walled apartment, the aroma of freshly made scrambled eggs and black coffee emanated from the kitchen, filling every corner of the room with a false domestic warmth. But before I continue, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment letting us know which city you're watching from in the US. This helps us see how far our story can spread. Isabella, wearing a faded cotton robe whose colors had long since washed out, moved nimbly between the stovetop and the dining table. Her expert hands scrambled the eggs, added just the right amount of salt, and then dropped 2 slices of bread into the toaster. She did everything in a silence that had become her companion over the last 2 years. It was her morning ritual, a musicless dance offered to her only spectator, who rarely applauded, her husband, James. When James emerged from the bedroom, the sharp scent of expensive cologne immediately overpowered the fragrance of Isabella's kitchen. He wore an impeccably ironed navy blue shirt and sharply creased black slacks that fit him perfectly. His leather shoes shone like a mirror. He was the picture of success, a rising marketing manager at a large corporation called the Mendoza Group. He gave the dining table a quick glance, his brow furrowing slightly at the sight of the plated eggs. "Scrambled eggs again?" he asked. His tone was flat, more of a statement than a question. There was no thank you or a good morning smile. Isabella managed a slight smile, one trained not to show the wounds in her heart. "I'm sorry, James. I thought you liked them. You said they were delicious yesterday," she replied softly, pouring coffee into his favorite mug. James snorted gently, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "Just because they're delicious doesn't mean I want to eat this every day, Isabella. Once in a while make a classier breakfast, like avocado toast with smoked salmon or some expensive brand of cereal. You know, like what people at the office eat. This makes me look like some broke guy." He took a lazy bite of the eggs as if performing a chore. Isabella didn't respond. She simply sat across from him, sipping her hot tea in silence. This was how their mornings were, every day. James, with his dazzling world of status and image, and Isabella with the world she had created for herself within that apartment, a world of forced simplicity. James never knew that the woman before him, whom he called a small-town girl, could buy the industrial bakery and the vast wheat farms that supplied his bread with a single phone call. He didn't know that the Mendoza Group, the place where he worked himself to exhaustion to climb the corporate ladder, was owned by the very woman whose breakfast he was scorning. Isabella Mendoza, the sole heiress to the business empire of the late Richard Mendoza, had deliberately given up her crown. She was tired of a world that only saw her as a walking dollar sign. The bitter memories of her past were still etched deep, like a burn that never fades. Several years before meeting James, she had been in a relationship with a man named Ethan. Ethan was a charming man with sweet words capable of melting an iceberg. He adored Isabella, or rather, he adored Isabella's bank account. He never hesitated to ask for the latest sports car as a birthday gift, or a luxury watch as a token of love. Isabella, still naive at the time and yearning for sincere affection, gave him everything. The tipping point came when Ethan proposed. Isabella was overjoyed, feeling she had finally found someone who loved her for who she was. They planned a lavish wedding. However, a week before the big day, Isabella accidentally overheard a phone conversation Ethan was having with his friend. "Of course I'll marry her. After I'm officially her husband, half the Mendoza fortune will be mine. After that, we can have all the fun we want. A boring woman like her is only good for squeezing her fortune dry." Isabella's world collapsed. She called off the wedding that very instant, threw Ethan out of her life, and decided to go into hiding. She was sick of men who approached her with ulterior motives. She longed to be just Isabella, not Isabella Mendoza. And so, her charade began. She bought an apartment in a working-class neighborhood, far from the hustle and bustle of downtown. She changed her appearance, locking away all her designer clothes and jewelry in a secret closet. She started living like an ordinary person, working part-time at a small neighborhood bookstore. It was there that she met James. Back then, James was just a junior marketing employee who stopped by looking for a book. He seemed so ambitious, full of enthusiasm, and his eyes shone when he talked about his dreams. He didn't know who Isabella was. He only saw a simple bookstore clerk. He approached her, courting her with promises of a bright future. For Isabella, this felt like a breath of fresh air. James loved her. Isabella, the simple girl, not Isabella the heiress to the throne, or so she thought. So when James proposed, Isabella accepted with high hopes. She decided to continue her charade. She wanted to be certain that James's love was truly sincere. She would tell him who she was eventually, at the right time, when she was sure he loved her without the Mendoza name attached. She asked only one thing of him before they married. She wanted him to change jobs. She didn't want any chance of James discovering her identity by accident. But James flatly refused. "I fought too hard to get my position at the Mendoza Group, Isabella. It's everyone's dream company. I'm not giving that up." Isabella, not wanting to seem insistent and raise suspicion, eventually gave in. She could only hope that James, being just a mid-level manager, would never have dealings that would lead him to meet the company's top executives or owners. After 2 years of marriage, Isabella's hopes were slowly fading. James had managed to get promoted to manager, but his attitude toward Isabella had worsened. The higher his position, the more he seemed to feel that Isabella was a burden. He began to be ashamed to acknowledge her as his wife in front of his glamorous colleagues. He often came home late at night, using meetings as an excuse, with the faint scent of another woman's perfume clinging to his shirt. He became increasingly calculating, giving her an allowance for household expenses that was extremely tight, even though his manager's salary was more than sufficient. He didn't know that Isabella had to secretly transfer a large sum of money from her personal account to their household account every month, just to keep the kitchen running and the bills paid. "I'm leaving." James's voice cut through Isabella's thoughts. He was already standing at the doorway, adjusting his tie. He didn't turn around. There was no kiss on the forehead or cheek. There was no warm hug, just a brief announcement that he was going. Isabella nodded. "Drive safe, James." After the sound of James's car faded away, silence once again enveloped the apartment. Isabella looked at James's plate of eggs, of which only a quarter was missing. The leftover food felt like a symbol of their marriage, an offering that was never truly appreciated. She carried the plate to the kitchen, a sting in her eyes. Patience has a limit, and Isabella felt that the limit of her patience was now as thin as a thread. She looked at her reflection in the kitchen window. A woman in a faded robe with a tired face. This wasn't her. It was a character she had created, a role she had played so perfectly that she had almost forgotten who she really was. But today, the first cracks in her mask were beginning to show. She wondered how much longer she would have to continue this charade. How much longer did she have to be a shadow in her own home, when she was the sun in the company where her husband served? A week passed with the same routine. Silent mornings, criticized breakfasts, and lonely nights. Isabella lived her days like a robot. Her heart felt numb. The hope that had once blossomed in her heart was now withered, turned to the dust of disappointment. She began to accept the bitter reality that James would probably never change. The man she had married was not a prince in frog's clothing, but a frog who dreamed of becoming a prince by stepping on the backs of others, including his own wife. One evening, James came home earlier than usual. His face was beaming, a sight so rare it startled Isabella a little. He even brought a box of pastries from a famous bakery, Isabella's favorite dessert. Isabella greeted him with a glimmer of hope. Would today be different? Had James finally realized his mistakes? "What is it, James? It's rare to see you so cheerful," Isabella greeted him, taking his briefcase. James grinned from ear to ear, a smile Isabella hadn't seen in months. "I have great news. I'm being promoted to senior manager, and to celebrate, the company is hosting a huge annual gala this weekend. All the top executives will be there. It's my chance to shine," he exclaimed, full of enthusiasm. Isabella's heart sank. So that was the reason. It wasn't because he missed her. It wasn't because he wanted to fix their relationship. It was all for his own ambition. Still, Isabella maintained her best smile. "Wow, congratulations, James. I'm so happy for you," James continued, pulling a golden envelope from his briefcase. "And I want you to come with me." He handed the invitation to Isabella. For a moment, Isabella was stunned. It was the first time James had invited her to a major office event. Until now, he always had 100 excuses to go alone. The event is boring. You wouldn't like it. It's for executives only. A spark of hope rekindled in Isabella's heart. Could this be a good sign? Was James finally ready to introduce her as his wife, to acknowledge her in his professional world? She opened the invitation, printed in gold ink on thick, luxurious paper. It read, "The Mendoza Group Annual Celebration Gala." The venue, the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. Isabella's heart beat a little faster. She was going to attend her own party as a guest of one of her employees. The irony was so bitter. "Of course I want to go, James. Thank you for inviting me," Isabella said with a sincere voice. The smile on James's face faded slightly, replaced by a serious expression. He sat on the sofa, gesturing for Isabella to sit as well. "There are a few things we need to talk about, some conditions," he said, in a tone that made Isabella's stomach churn. "Conditions?" Isabella repeated, not understanding. "Yes, conditions," James affirmed. "Listen, Isabella, the people coming to this party are not just anybody. They're directors, investors, important people. Appearance is everything to them. I don't want the slightest mistake to damage my image." Isabella swallowed hard. A bad feeling began to creep over her. "First, your clothes." James looked Isabella up and down. His gaze was like he was evaluating cheap merchandise. "Wear your plainest dress, a dark-colored one. Black or dark brown. Nothing with patterns, nothing with bright colors. And most importantly, don't wear any jewelry. No necklaces, no earrings, no bracelets, just your usual watch." Isabella glanced at the simple dresses hanging in her closet, dresses she had bought at a thrift store for less than $20. She thought of the collection of world-class designer gowns hidden in her secret closet, dresses whose price could buy a car. She also thought of her jewelry box filled with diamonds and sapphires inherited from her mother. James's request felt like a slap in the face. "Second," James continued, oblivious to the change in Isabella's expression, "don't talk much there, just smile. If someone asks you something, give a short answer. Don't try to start a conversation with anyone, especially not my bosses. You don't understand their world. You'll only embarrass yourself and me." Every word from James felt like a needle piercing Isabella's heart. So, he wasn't inviting her as a partner, but as a silent accessory that shouldn't shine too brightly. "And third, and this is the most important," James leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "There, don't act like my wife. Act normal. Keep your distance from me. I'll be busy networking, talking to important people. I don't want you clinging to me, bothering me. Just pretend you're like a distant relative who just happened to be in town. Understood?" All the hope Isabella had felt ignite was completely extinguished, doused by the cold water of James's cruelty. So this was his purpose. He was inviting her only to fulfill a formality, or perhaps because there was an unwritten rule that employees should bring a partner. But there, her status would be degraded, her presence camouflaged. She would no longer be a wife, just a distant relative. This humiliation felt so painful, so wounding to her pride as a woman and a wife. Isabella could only nod slowly. She had a lump in her throat, unable to utter a single word. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back with all her might. She wouldn't give James the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Seeing Isabella's compliance, James smiled, satisfied. "Good that you understand. This is for our future too, Isabella. If I succeed, you'll be happy too, right?" He gave her a condescending pat on the shoulder. Then he stood up and went into the bedroom, leaving Isabella stunned in the living room, with the golden invitation that felt hot in her hands. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She lay beside James, who was already fast asleep, listening to his soft snores that sounded like mockery. She felt so stupid, stupid for having hoped, stupid for continuing to try and endure. She got up from the bed and walked slowly to her hidden home office behind a bookshelf. She opened her laptop and made a video call. On the screen, the face of an older, wise, and authoritative man appeared. "Mr. Garcia, a senior director at the Mendoza Group, her father's trusted confidant, and the only person in the company who knew Isabella's true identity. "Miss Isabella, what is it at this hour?" Mr. Garcia asked, his expression concerned. Isabella told him everything about the party invitation, about the conditions James had imposed. Mr. Garcia listened intently, his face hardening with anger. "How dare he, Miss Isabella? This is unacceptable. You shouldn't have to endure such humiliation. Don't go. Let me teach him a lesson," Mr. Garcia said furiously. Isabella shook her head slowly. Her eyes shone with a different light. It was no longer the light of sadness, but of determination. "No, Mr. Garcia. I will go." "But, Miss Isabella, I have to go," Isabella interrupted, her voice firm. "I have to see it with my own eyes. I have to know just how far he's willing to stoop. I'm tired of this charade, sir. Maybe this party will be the final stage for the two of us." Mr. Garcia fell silent. He saw in her eyes the same look her late father had, the look of a leader who would not back down. "Very well, Miss Isabella. What should I prepare?" "Prepare everything, sir. Set the stage. Because it seems that this weekend there will be a grand performance in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. A performance where the Queen will finally reclaim her crown," Isabella whispered, more to herself than to him. When she closed the laptop, her heart no longer felt pain. There was only a cold emptiness and a burning promise of retribution. The gala wouldn't be James's night of glory. On the contrary, it would be the night of his downfall, and Isabella would be the director. That night, the air felt heavy and suffocating. Isabella stood before the large mirror in her room, observing her reflection with an empty gaze. She wore a plain, long-sleeved black dress with a straight cut that fell just below the knee. It was the cheapest dress she could find in her closet, one she had bought at a thrift store a year ago. The fabric was a bit rough to the touch, and the seams weren't very neat, but it met all the criteria James had set: plain, dark, and inconspicuous. She was a blank canvas, a shadow ready to blend into the crowd. Her long black hair was pulled back neatly into a simple ponytail. Her face was bare, without makeup, except for a bit of lip balm. She wore no jewelry. Her wrists were bare, her long neck empty. Her ears were unadorned with earrings. The reflection in the mirror was that of a stranger. It wasn't the Isabella Mendoza who used to command boardrooms in expensive designer suits, nor was it the cheerful Isabella from the bookstore. This reflection was the embodiment of James's desire. A woman without identity, without sparkle, without a voice. She remembered the galas she used to attend with her parents. Her mother would help her choose a shimmering silk gown, style her hair with diamond clips, and place the family heirloom necklace around her neck. "You are a Mendoza, my daughter," her mother would say. "Walk with your head held high. Show the world the beauty of your heart reflected in your smile." Tonight, she would walk with her head down, hiding not only her identity, but also her shattered heart. "Are you ready?" James's voice sounded from the doorway. He was already impeccable in an expensive black suit, looking very handsome and powerful. He looked Isabella up and down. A small nod indicated his satisfaction. Isabella's appearance was perfect in the sense that it would attract no one's attention. "Good. Let's go. We can't be late." The drive to the hotel felt like a journey to the gallows. James focused on driving, occasionally smiling as he glanced at his phone screen. Isabella was sure he was texting Tiffany, planning their night of triumph. Isabella, for her part, just stared out the window. The city lights flickered like thousands of watching eyes, silent witnesses to the drama about to unfold. She didn't feel nervous or scared. Strangely, what she felt was a cold calm, as if her heart had frozen over, incapable of feeling any more pain. Tonight was not the end for her, but a beginning, the beginning of her freedom. The five-star hotel stood imposing on Fifth Avenue. Its grand lobby was filled with people in formal wear. Laughter and the clinking of glasses could be heard everywhere. James handed his car keys to the valet and walked ahead of Isabella without waiting for her. Isabella followed from behind, maintaining a distance of several steps as instructed. She could feel the stares of some people glancing her way, curious looks that quickly turned to disdain upon seeing her appearance, which contrasted with the surrounding luxury. The grand ballroom was truly breathtaking. A giant crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow throughout the room. Round tables were set with crisp white tablecloths and adorned with fresh lilies. Jazz music from a band on a corner stage added a touch of elegance to the atmosphere. Hundreds of people, the top executives and best employees of the Mendoza Group, were gathered there. They were the people who indirectly worked for Isabella, people whose fates were in her hands. And tonight, among them, she was just a nameless woman. Upon entering the room, James immediately turned to Isabella. "Okay, wait near the food area," he said, pointing to a somewhat dark corner near the buffet tables. "Don't move from there. Get a drink or something to eat if you want, and remember everything I told you. Don't do anything stupid." After saying that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her alone, without a single look back. Isabella took a deep breath. The show had begun. She walked slowly to the corner James had indicated, picked up a glass of orange juice, and stood by a large pillar, using it as a refuge from people's gazes. From her position, she could see almost the entire room. She was like a director observing her actors from behind the stage. Her eyes locked on James. Her husband was like a fish that had found its way back to water. He moved nimbly from one group to another, greeting with a wide smile, laughing with feigned heartiness, shaking hands with directors with exaggerated respect. He was a perfect chameleon, able to change the color of his skin according to his social environment. And then Isabella saw her. Tiffany. The woman looked stunning in a fire-red dress that hugged her body perfectly. Her hair was up in a modern bun, and her lips were painted with a red lipstick to match her dress. She walked with complete confidence, greeting everyone as if she were the queen of the night. Soon after, James and Tiffany found each other. They didn't need words, a smile, a look, and James wrapped his arm possessively around Tiffany's waist. They looked so good together, so perfect, the ambitious couple ready to conquer the world. Isabella watched them from a distance, feeling her heart being squeezed. She watched as James whispered something in Tiffany's ear, making the woman laugh flirtatiously. She watched as James poured Tiffany a glass of champagne, while she stood here with only a glass of orange juice. She watched as James's colleagues patted him on the back, looking at Tiffany with admiration. They were the ideal couple, and Isabella. Isabella was the dirty secret that had to be hidden in a corner of the room. A few junior employees who were getting food glanced at Isabella with pity. Perhaps they thought she was a catering staff member on her break, or a distant relative of some low-ranking employee. Isabella just gave them a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. She didn't need their pity. Tonight she only needed the strength to finish what had to be finished. She saw Mr. Garcia near the stage, talking to several members of the board. For an instant, their eyes met. Mr. Garcia gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a wordless message that said, "I'm here, Miss Isabella, I'm with you." Isabella returned the nod in the same way. The strength of her loyal ally was more than enough. She turned her gaze back to James and Tiffany. They were now laughing with the senior manager of another division. Tiffany was arrogantly telling a story, and James was looking at her with adoration, a look Isabella had never received in their 2 years of marriage. In that moment, Isabella knew there was nothing left to save, no hope remaining. The fire of love she had once tried to kindle for James had been completely extinguished, leaving only the cold ashes of betrayal. She drank her orange juice in one gulp. The empty glass felt cold in her hand, as cold as her heart at that moment. She wouldn't wait any longer. She was ready to go after her own destiny. The soft jazz music became the soundtrack to a drama invisible to most. The party had reached its peak. Everyone was absorbed in conversation, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. James felt like the king of the world. He was at the center of a small circle that included the most influential people in his division, among them Mr. Miller, the assistant marketing director, the man whose position was James's next target. At his side, Tiffany clung to him flirtatiously, playing her role of the supportive and charming partner perfectly. James was laughing heartily at one of Mr. Miller's jokes when he saw a black shadow approaching. His heart stopped for a second when he realized the shadow was Isabella. What was she doing here? Hadn't he ordered her to stay in the corner? Panic seized him, fearing that Isabella would do something foolish and ruin everything. Isabella was walking calmly. She had no intention of approaching them. She just wanted to leave her empty glass on the nearest table and get a glass of water. Her throat was dry. However, fate seemed to deliberately guide her into the eye of the storm. As she passed near their group, the sharp-eyed Mr. Miller noticed her. "James," Mr. Miller called, his deep voice cutting through their laughter. "Who is this plain-looking woman? I don't think I've seen her before." Now all eyes were on Isabella. She stopped, standing awkwardly under the scrutiny of their inquisitive gazes. She could feel Tiffany's sharp stare on her, full of hatred and triumph. This was the decisive moment for James. He could have told the truth, "She's my wife." Or he could have lied elegantly, "She's a distant relative." But arrogance and cruelty had poisoned his mind. He saw this as an opportunity, not a threat, an opportunity to show how far he had come, how much he had left his old world behind, and at the same time, to humiliate Isabella at her lowest point. A cynical smile played on James's lips. He looked at Isabella with disdain, as if she were a disgusting insect. "Oh, Mr. Miller," he said in a light, casual tone, as if talking about something trivial. "This is Isabella." He paused, letting everyone wait. Then, in a voice loud enough for everyone around them to hear, he continued, "She's my housekeeper, very hard-working. She just happened to come by to help out if anything is needed." Time seemed to stand still. The jazz music suddenly sounded discordant. The air around Isabella grew thin, making it hard to breathe. Housekeeper. That word echoed in her head, striking her consciousness like a sledgehammer. So that's what she was in James's eyes. Not a wife, not a life partner, not even a distant relative. Just a housekeeper. All her sacrifices for 2 years, her patience, her sincere love, all reduced to that one humiliating word. Some in the group laughed uncomfortably. Mr. Miller raised an eyebrow, looking a little surprised, but said nothing. Tiffany, on the other hand, smiled triumphantly. Her smile was so wide, so satisfied, as if she had just won the biggest lottery of her life. She looked at Isabella with such blatant superiority, savoring every second of the woman's suffering before her. Isabella felt nothing but a coldness that chilled her to the bone. Her already cracked heart now shattered into dust. There was nothing left to save, nothing left to fight for. As if that humiliation weren't enough, James decided to drive the final dagger straight into Isabella's heart. He pulled Tiffany closer, wrapped his arm firmly around her waist, and kissed her tenderly on the cheek. "In fact, sir, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce someone very special to me." He looked at Tiffany with a fake look of love. "Everyone, this is Tiffany, my future wife." The second explosion. If the word housekeeper was a sledgehammer, the phrase my future wife was an atomic bomb that obliterated what was left of Isabella's feelings. He had not only denied her, he had replaced her, and he did it all in public, on the stage of the farce James had created. He had erased her from his life, as if she had never existed. Isabella looked at James's face, the face of the man she once loved sincerely, the face of the man who slept in the same bed with her every night. She searched for a hint of regret, a flicker of guilt, but found nothing. What she found was blind ambition and a terrifying emptiness. Then she looked at Tiffany, the woman who proudly snatched her husband, who was now smiling arrogantly as if she were the victor. Isabella didn't cry. She didn't scream. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, something inside her awakened, something that had been dormant for a long time. A severely wounded lioness, now opening her eyes with a burning rage. The pain transformed into strength. The humiliation turned into fuel. With her back straight and her head held high, Isabella looked directly into James's eyes. She said nothing. Her gaze was enough, a cold, piercing look filled with a promise. The promise of revenge. James, seeing that look, felt a brief flicker of intimidation, but he quickly dismissed it, thinking it was just the empty stare of a weak, defeated woman. Without a word, Isabella turned and walked away from the group. Her steps were firm and measured. The crowd seemed to part for her, sensing the cold aura emanating from her. She didn't return to her corner. She walked straight towards a secluded hallway that led to the restrooms and staff rooms. Each step was a decision. First step, end her marriage. Second step, end her suffering. Third step, begin her revenge. In that lonely hallway, she finally leaned against the wall. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes, letting all the pain flow out of her, transforming into a new energy, the energy of anger. She took her phone out of the small purse she carried. Her hands didn't tremble. With steady fingers, she typed a short message to the only person she could trust. Her message consisted of just 2 words, sent to Mr. Garcia. It's time. The hallway felt cold and silent, a stark contrast to the bustling false warmth of the ballroom. Isabella leaned against the smooth marble wall, feeling its coolness through the thin fabric of her dress, but it failed to cool the fire burning in her chest. The short message had been sent. 2 words that would change everything. It's time. A simple phrase that was a declaration of war. For a moment, she stood motionless. Her body trembled violently, not from fear, but from the wave of emotions that finally broke the dam of patience she had built over 2 years. James's humiliation was the final stone that brought that dam crashing down, and now a torrent flooded her soul. She pressed her palms to her mouth, stifling the first sob that finally escaped her throat. The tears flowed freely, hot and full of pain. It wasn't the weeping of a weak woman lamenting her fate. It was a cry of mourning. She cried for herself, for the naive Isabella who had yearned so much for sincere love that she was willing to blind herself to all the red flags. She cried for her marriage, a beautiful construction that turned out to be built on a sandy foundation of lies and ambition. She cried for the small memories she had once considered sweet, which now tasted like poison. The first time James praised her, when he held her hand in the park, when he spoke his sacred vows before God, it was all fake. It was all part of a grand script in which she was just a supporting prop. Every word James had uttered in the ballroom spun in her head like a broken record. My housekeeper, my future wife. The words were so cruel, so sharp, they shredded the remnants of her dignity until nothing was left. James hadn't just betrayed her, he had annihilated Isabella's existence as his wife. He had erased her. In the eyes of James and his world, Isabella was nothing more than a shadow, invisible dust. Her crying intensified, her body slowly sliding down to the cold floor. She hugged her knees, allowing herself to break one last time in that lonely hallway. She let all the pain, all the disappointment, all the repressed anger pour out with those tears. She needed to empty herself of all that poison before she could be filled again with something else. Something stronger. She remembered her father, the late Richard Mendoza, a strict man but with a heart as soft as silk. Her father had once told her, "Isabella, my child, crying is not a sign of weakness. Crying is our soul's way of cleansing its wounds. When you are done crying, stand up stronger than before, because you will have proven that you are a survivor." Tonight, she was a survivor. She had survived the greatest storm of betrayal in her life. Slowly, her sobs subsided. The tears stopped flowing. All that remained was the wet trace on her cheeks and the sting in her eyes. She lifted her head, looking at her blurred reflection on the shiny marble floor. What she saw was no longer the face of a victim. What she saw was rage, a pure, cold, and highly concentrated rage. The pain had metamorphosed, changing from a hot, searing liquid into a sharp block of ice. She would no longer be the gentle, submissive Isabella. That woman had died in the ballroom, murdered by her own husband's words. The one who rose from that death was Isabella Mendoza, the heiress, the leader, the queen who had hidden her crown for far too long. James wanted to see a plain woman. She would show him. She would show him just how dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who seemed plain, because behind that simplicity could hide a force capable of shaking the world. Her phone vibrated gently in her hand. A reply from Mr. Garcia. "It will be done immediately, Miss Isabella. The stage awaits you." Isabella read the message, and a faint, cold smile touched her lips. Mr. Garcia never disappointed. She stood up, her feet feeling firm on the ground. She walked to the women's restroom at the end of the hall. In front of a large, gold-framed mirror, she looked at herself one more time. Her eyes were swollen and red, but her gaze was as sharp as an eagle's. She turned on the faucet and splashed her face with cold water, washing away the remnants of her tears. Each splash felt like a baptism for her new self. She looked at the simple elastic band holding her hair in a ponytail, a symbol of her restraint. With one swift motion, she pulled it off. Her thick, long black hair fell beautifully over her back like a silk curtain. This was her. This was her crown. A small act that felt like a great rebellion. Her cheap black dress now felt different. It was no longer a cloth to wrap her shame, but a uniform of war. Its dark color would be the perfect backdrop for the light show she was about to ignite. She didn't need an expensive dress or sparkling jewelry to show who she was. Her strength lay not in what she wore, but in who she was. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air that felt new and full of possibility. She was done crying. She was done mourning. Now, it was time to act. She smoothed her dress, swept her hair back over her shoulders, and looked at her reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror stared back. Her eyes shone with determination. "Let's finish this," the woman in the mirror whispered soundlessly. Isabella nodded. She was ready. She walked out of the restroom, leaving the old Isabella behind, and strode back towards the arena. When Isabella emerged from the dark hallway and re-entered the brilliantly lit ballroom, something was different, not in her, but in the atmosphere around her. It was as if the room's center of gravity had shifted and was now focused on her. She no longer walked with her head slightly bowed, trying to be invisible. Now her head was held high, her chin slightly lifted, and her gaze was fixed forward, cutting through the crowd without fear. Her steps were firm and rhythmic on the marble floor. Each tap of her simple shoes sounded like the beat of a war drum only she could hear. She no longer slipped through the crowd. On the contrary, the crowd seemed to part to let her pass. People who were busy chatting instinctively stopped talking and turned. They saw a woman in a plain black dress with long, loose hair walking with an aura of undeniable power. Whispers began to spread from table to table like wildfire. "Who is that woman? I think I've seen her before, but she looks different. Look at the expression in her eyes. She's not just anybody." The people who had previously looked at her with disdain now watched her with a mixture of curiosity and awe. They didn't know who she was, but they could feel that something big was about to happen. From across the room, James saw her. He was laughing at a compliment from Mr. Miller, Tiffany's hand still affectionately wrapped around his arm. James's laughter died in his throat as his eyes caught the figure of Isabella walking directly towards the stage. His heart hammered. This time, not with joy, but with a terrible premonition. What was she doing? Why was everyone looking at her? "Who is that?" "Looks like the housekeeper wants some attention," Tiffany whispered, but there was a note of unease in her voice. "Shut up," James hissed, his eyes never leaving Isabella. He watched how she walked. Her posture, the way she held her head, it wasn't the posture of a housekeeper. It was the posture of someone who owned this place. A cold panic began to creep up his spine. What was that crazy woman going to do? She kept walking, ignoring the stares and whispers. Her goal was singular, the stage. Near the small staircase leading to the stage, Mr. Garcia was already waiting for her. The most respected senior director in the entire company stood tall, like a loyal bodyguard. He offered her his hand. "Everything is ready, as you ordered, Miss Isabella," Mr. Garcia whispered softly. His voice was firm and full of respect. "Thank you, Mr. Garcia. You'll never know how much your support means to me tonight," Isabella replied, her voice calm but trembling with contained emotion. She took his hand and ascended the stage steps. On stage, an MC was trying to liven up the mood with a lame joke, preparing to announce a raffle winner. He was bewildered to see an unknown woman and his senior director suddenly walk onto the stage. Before the MC could say anything, Mr. Garcia was at his side, whispering something quickly in his ear. The MC's eyes widened in shock. His face went pale. He nodded stiffly several times. Then, with a trembling hand, he handed the microphone he was holding to Isabella before discreetly retreating to the back of the stage, as if he had just seen a ghost. This action did not go unnoticed by any of the guests in the hall. The once bustling atmosphere fell completely silent. The jazz music, playing in the background, abruptly stopped on a signal from Mr. Garcia to the sound technician. Now, the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on a single point, the mysterious woman in the black dress, now standing alone in the middle of the stage, holding a microphone. The spotlight that had previously illuminated the whole room slowly dimmed, leaving a single bright light focused directly on Isabella, making her the only luminous point in a sea of darkness. In the crowd, James froze. His world seemed to stop. He didn't understand what was happening. Why was Isabella on stage? Why was Mr. Garcia helping her? Why had the entire event come to a halt for her? Tiffany, beside him, was also pale. Her grip on his arm tightened. The triumphant smile on her face had vanished, replaced by an expression of confusion and fear. Isabella stood silently for a moment on stage, letting the silence envelop the room. She took a deep breath. Her gaze swept over all the faces, watching her faces that were confused, curious, and some, like those of James and Tiffany, filled with a dawning terror. She could feel her own heartbeat, strong and steady. She was no longer trembling, no longer afraid. This was her arena. This was her kingdom. And tonight, the queen had returned to take her throne. She slowly raised the microphone to her lips. The silence in the ballroom was so dense that it seemed everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the first word to come from this woman's mouth. The real show was about to begin. The silence in the ballroom was so absolute, so dense. It was as if sound itself had been forcibly ripped from the room. Hundreds of people, managers, directors, and top employees were now frozen in place. All eyes were fixed on a single figure on the stage, the figure of a woman in a plain black dress holding a microphone with terrifying calm. Under the spotlight, she no longer looked like an ordinary woman. She looked like a judge about to read her verdict. Isabella breathed in slowly, the sound of her breath faintly audible through the speakers, the only noise in an ocean of silence. Her lips finally parted. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice was clear, calm, and resonated with an unexpected authority. The voice spread to every corner of the room, touching each person and compelling them to listen. It was not the voice of a housekeeper. It was not the voice of a frightened woman. It was the voice of a leader. In the crowd, James felt a cold sweat trickle down his temples. He recognized that voice, but at the same time, it was alien to him. There was a power behind it he had never heard before. Tiffany, beside him, was gripping his arm so tightly it hurt. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Thank you for taking the time to attend the Mendoza Group's annual celebration tonight," Isabella continued, her tone polite and professional. "Tonight is a night to celebrate our achievements together. An achievement that would not have been possible without the dedication of all of you, and of course, without the vision of this company's founders." She paused, letting her words sink in. The senior directors at the front table exchanged confused glances, wondering who this woman was, who dared to speak as if she were the host of the event. "I know many of you probably don't recognize me," Isabella said, her gaze now sweeping the room, pausing for a moment on each passing face before finally landing and locking onto James. James felt as if that gaze stripped him bare, tearing away all his lies and pretenses. "For some time now, I have chosen to live a simple life, away from the spotlight. I wanted to see this company from a different perspective. I wanted to feel its pulse from the ground up. And most importantly, I wanted to find sincerity in a world often blinded by luxury." James's heart was beating faster and faster, so loudly he feared the person next to him could hear it. The bad feeling that had only been creeping up on him had now become a monster gripping his throat. "It can't be. This can't be happening." Isabella lifted her chin a little higher, the spotlight illuminating her face, highlighting an expression of firmness she had long hidden behind a gentle smile. This was the moment. There was no turning back. "My name is Isabella Mendoza." A collective gasp swept through the room. Mendoza. That name was sacred in this company. Several older directors who had worked directly under Richard Mendoza leaned forward, squinting, trying to recognize the woman's face. Then, Isabella dropped the real bomb. "Daughter of the late Richard and Carmen Mendoza, the founders of this company. And for the past 2 years, since their passing, I have been the sole owner and chief executive officer of the Mendoza Group." If the previous silence was dense, The one that followed this declaration felt like a black hole, sucking all the air and sound out of the room. For a split second, no one moved, no one breathed. Then, reality hit them all at once. The sound of a champagne glass falling from someone's hand and shattering on the floor broke the silence, and then the ballroom erupted into a sea of tumultuous whispers. "Isabella Mendoza? Richard's daughter is alive? The CEO? So she's been leading us all this time?" But her appearance. The senior directors, who had been confused, now had their expressions change dramatically from shock to recognition and then to overwhelming respect. They could see it now, the shadow of Richard Mendoza's charisma in Isabella's piercing gaze. However, for one person in that room, Isabella's words were not a revelation. They were an execution. For James, the world stopped spinning. The floor beneath his feet seemed to open up and swallow him into a bottomless abyss of darkness. Isabella Mendoza. Owner. CEO. The words buzzed in his ears, destroying every cell in his brain. The woman whose breakfast he despised every morning. The woman to whom he gave a tight allowance for expenses. The woman he called a small-town girl and foolish behind her back. The woman whom, just minutes ago, he had introduced as his housekeeper in front of his boss, was his boss's boss. She was the owner of everything he had fought for so desperately. His face turned ashen, his breath caught in his throat. A flood of memories assaulted him mercilessly. When Isabella asked him to change jobs from the Mendoza Group and he flatly refused. When he bragged about his promotion to her, not realizing the appointment letter might have been signed by that very woman. When he complained about how hard it was to work at the Mendoza Group to the woman who carried the entire weight of the company on her shoulders, his stupidity, his arrogance. It all seemed so monumental, so cosmic. He felt like the smallest ant in the universe who had just tried to spit at the sundae. He turned to Tiffany. The woman was staring at him in horror, her face just as pale. Her gaze no longer held love or admiration, but pure hatred. You didn't know?" she whispered, trembling. James could only shake his head weakly. Tiffany released her grip on his arm as if it were made of hot coals and took a step back, creating a distance between them. Their ship had sunk before it even set sail, and now it was every man for himself. On stage, Isabella remained calm, letting the information be absorbed by everyone. She was like a queen who had just announced her presence to her people. She let the truth spread, its shockwave knocking down every pillar of lies James had built. Her eyes, which had scanned the room, refocused on a single point: her husband. She saw his pale face, his empty gaze, his body swaying slightly. She felt no triumph. What she felt was a cold relief. At last, the mask had fallen. At last, it was all over. After letting the truth hang in the air for a few moments that felt like an eternity, Isabella raised the microphone again. Her calm voice immediately cut through the murmur of whispers, drawing everyone's attention back to her. "Your attention again, please," she said, her tone now a bit sharper, firmer. "I know this news may be surprising to most of you, but believe me, no one is more surprised tonight than I am." Her eyes never left James. "I am surprised to discover the standard of ethics that prevails among certain employees of the company my parents built with their blood and sweat. A company that staunchly upholds the values of integrity and respect." She paused. Her gaze shifted to Tiffany, who now stood rigid like a wax statue. "And now, if you don't mind, I have a small domestic matter that I must unfortunately resolve here in front of all of you, because someone has deliberately dragged it onto this public stage." Her words were laced with biting irony. Every head in the room turned in unison toward James. He felt like a cornered animal. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were staring, judging. He wanted to run, to disappear, but his feet felt glued to the floor. "James," Isabella called out. His own name, spoken in her cold voice through the speakers, sounded like a curse. "Please, come forward." It was not a request, it was a command. James didn't move. His body refused to obey. Mr. Miller, who stood beside him, gave him a look of disgust before stepping away, clearing a path. Seeing James wouldn't move, Isabella continued. "Oh, no need. Allow me to come to you through words." She gripped the microphone tighter. "James, a marketing manager who, I hear, is very successful. a very ambitious man, willing to do anything to get ahead, and also a husband. She pronounced the word husband with an emphasis that made everyone hold their breath. A husband so proud of his new status that he is ashamed of the wife who has been with him from the bottom. A husband who prefers to introduce his own wife as, "What was it you said, James?" "Ah, yes, a housekeeper." Overwhelming shame burned James's face. He could hear some people gasp in shock. This scandal was far worse than they had imagined. "You know, James," Isabella continued, her voice now a little softer but sounding even more lethal, "I can forgive many things. I can forgive your arrogance. I can forgive the way you belittled me at home. I might even be able to try and forgive your infidelity." Her gaze flickered for an instant to Tiffany, who immediately looked down. "But what I can never forgive," Isabella's voice hardened again, filled with a cold strength, "is you deliberately trampling on my dignity, my honor, in front of everyone, just for your own rotten personal ambition. You didn't just humiliate me, you humiliated the institution of marriage you swore an oath to before God." "Isabella, honey, James finally found his voice, but only a hoarse, pathetic whisper came out. "I can explain." "There is nothing to explain." Isabella cut him off, her voice booming. "Your explanation was made crystal clear when you introduced another woman as your future wife. Tonight, you have shown your true character. And a character like that has no place in my home or in my company." This was the climax, the moment of judgment. For a severe breach of ethics that cannot be tolerated, a shameful conflict of interest, and an immoral act that has tarnished the good name of the Mendoza Group at this very moment, and before all who are witnesses to your actions. Isabella looked directly into James's desperate eyes. "You're fired." The words echoed throughout the room, a final, irrefutable verdict. James stumbled back, as if he had just been dealt a devastating blow to the face. His dreams, his career, his future all shattered in a single sentence. But Isabella wasn't finished. Her gaze now turned to Tiffany, who was trembling with fear. "And you, Miss Tiffany," she said condescendingly. "This company looks for employees who excel through hard work and integrity, not through cunning and an ability to destroy other people's homes. Your ambition has blinded your work ethic. Please accompany your future husband in looking for a job elsewhere. You're fired too." The second verdict had been delivered. Tiffany covered her face with her hands, her sobs beginning to be heard. Isabella gave a small signal to the back of the stage. "Security." As if on cue, two burly security guards appeared from the side of the stage and walked swiftly and firmly towards James and Tiffany. The crowd automatically parted, creating an aisle of judgment. "Isabella, no, please," James tried to plead, reaching out his hand. "Give me a second chance." But Isabella just looked at him coldly. "Your second chances ran out a long time ago," she hissed under her breath, for herself alone. The security guards arrived in front of James and Tiffany. "Please, sir, ma'am, we'll escort you out," one of them said in a firm but polite voice. James and Tiffany had no choice. With infinite shame, flanked by the guards, they walked past hundreds of pairs of eyes that watched them with a mixture of contempt, pity, and disgust. Their walk of shame felt endless and torturous. Tiffany's sobs and James's faltering steps became the only music accompanying their fall. After the ballroom door closed behind them, Isabella turned back to her guests. She took a deep breath, as if expelling all the negative energy that had just occurred. "My apologies for that rather unpleasant interruption," she said, her voice professional again. "Now, let's all forget that unnecessary drama and continue with tonight's celebration to honor the hard work of all of you." For a moment, the room remained silent, everyone too stunned. Then, from the head table, Mr. Garcia stood up and began to applaud. His steady applause broke the silence. Then, one by one, the other directors stood and clapped as well. In seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into thunderous, roaring applause. It was no longer an applause of courtesy. It was an applause filled with admiration and respect for the Queen, who had just reclaimed her kingdom in the most dramatic fashion possible. Isabella nodded slightly. A faint smile finally touched her lips. Revenge was sweet, but what felt even sweeter was freedom. The imposing ballroom doors slammed shut behind James and Tiffany, cruelly throwing them back into the real world. The sound of enthusiastic applause, faintly audible from inside, felt like mocking laughter at their destruction. They now stood in the deserted hotel lobby, under the lamplight that felt too bright, bearing their shame. 2 security guards stood not far away, ensuring they truly left. For a moment, they were silent, shock still gripping them so tightly that words seemed frozen in their throats. Tiffany was the first to explode. "This is all your fault," she screamed, her voice hoarse and full of hatred. She turned on James, her eyes, once full of admiration, now burning with rage. "Housekeeper? Future wife? Are you insane? You've destroyed everything. You've destroyed my career, my life." She beat on James's chest with her small fists, her blows weak and desperate. James, his mind still blank, simply took the hits without reacting. Then, slowly, the shock faded, replaced by an equally massive wave of panic and anger. "My fault?" he hissed, roughly grabbing Tiffany's wrists. "You're the one who pushed me. You said I had to show who was boss. You enjoyed every second while I was humiliating her." He couldn't even bring himself to say Isabella's name. "I never told you to lie about your own wife who turned out to be the CEO of the company." "You idiot! You are the stupidest man I've ever met," Tiffany shrieked, trying to pull her hands free. "You said she was just some small-town girl with nothing. You said you were going to divorce her soon. All lies. I didn't know." James roared, his voice echoing in the empty lobby. "How was I supposed to know? She deceived me. For 2 years, she deceived me." He tried to find a justification, to blame Isabella, but even to his own ears, the excuse sounded weak and pathetic. Their bitter, blame-filled argument became a spectacle for a few passing hotel employees, their gazes filled with curiosity and contempt. James and Tiffany, who an hour ago had entered the hotel, with their heads held high, full of confidence, now looked like 2 vagrants fighting over scraps. The love and admiration they had paraded around was just a thin facade hiding their greed and ambition. Under pressure, the facade shattered, revealing the rot underneath. James let go of Tiffany. He staggered towards the hotel exit, followed by a still sobbing Tiffany. Outside, the cool night air felt like a slap. James tried to pull out his phone to call Isabella, to beg, to explain, but the screen showed only one word: blocked. He tried calling from Tiffany's number. The call was immediately rejected. It was over. It was really over. He saw the valet he had arrogantly tipped earlier. Now the employee looked at him differently, as if he knew he was a nobody. His reputation was ruined, and news of this scandal would surely spread like wildfire in professional circles by morning. No company would want to hire him. He was blacklisted. A dark, thick despair enveloped James. He stumbled and fell to his knees on the hard pavement. Everything he had built, everything he had dreamed of, vanished in an instant because of his own arrogance. He bowed his head and finally wept. They were not tears of remorse, but the desperate cries of a loser who had lost everything. Tiffany just looked at him with disgust before turning and walking away, leaving him alone amidst the rubble of the lies they had built together. Meanwhile, inside the ballroom, the atmosphere had completely changed. After James and Tiffany were expelled, Isabella quickly regained control of the event. She came down from the stage and was immediately greeted by the directors. "Miss Mendoza, I don't know what to say," said Mr. Miller, his face pale with embarrassment. "I apologize if earlier Don't worry, Mr. Miller," Isabella interrupted with a reassuring smile. "You didn't know anything. Let's forget it." Her dignified and magnanimous attitude instantly won everyone's respect. For the rest of the night, Isabella was surrounded by the company's top executives. Those who had previously only known her as a name on paper now vied to introduce themselves, to report, to pledge their loyalty. Isabella handled it all with extraordinary calm and intelligence. She could discuss marketing strategies with Mr. Miller, analyze financial reports with the CFO, and talk about expansion plans with the board. In less than an hour, she proved she was not just an heiress, but a competent and visionary leader. When the party finally ended and the guests began to leave, Isabella stood by the door, shaking their hands one by one, a gesture her father used to make. She was no longer hiding. She had taken her rightful place. "You did very well, Miss Isabella," Mr. Garcia's voice came from behind her. The old man looked at her with teary eyes full of pride. "Your father would be so proud." Isabella smiled sincerely. "Thank you, Mr. Garcia. I couldn't have done it without your help and trust." "What are your plans now regarding your home?" Mr. Garcia asked cautiously. Isabella looked out the window at the bustling city streets. "That little apartment is not my home, sir. It was a stage. Tonight, I'm going back to my real home." She did not return to the small apartment in Queens. A car arranged by Mr. Garcia drove her through familiar streets to an imposing wrought iron gate in an elite Upper East Side neighborhood. The gate swung open slowly, revealing a long private driveway flanked by impeccably manicured gardens. At the end of the drive stood a magnificent mansion, the Mendoza family home, the house where she grew up, filled with memories of laughter and warmth, the house she had abandoned for over 2 years. As she entered, the house lights turned on automatically, welcoming their owner home. A thin layer of dust covered some furniture, but the house still felt majestic and warm. This was her home. This was her true identity. She walked to the living room, looking at the large portrait of her parents hanging above the fireplace. They smiled down at her as if to say, "Welcome back, our daughter." Isabella smiled back. She had returned, alone and wounded, but whole and free. 3 months had passed since that dramatic night at the Mendoza Group's annual gala. The season had changed, and so had the life of Isabella Mendoza. She was no longer hiding. On the contrary, she embraced her destiny with open arms, leading the family company with a courage and vision that astonished many. That morning, Isabella sat at the head of a very long boardroom table. In the conference room, dominated by glass and dark wood, she wore a tailored navy blue pantsuit. Her hair was swept up into a chic, modern bun. Across from her sat the executives of the Mendoza Group, middle-aged men and women with decades of business experience. They all listened intently as Isabella laid out her plan for expansion into the digital market. She spoke fluently and confidently, quoting data and statistics from memory, answering every question with sharpness and intelligence. There was no trace left of the timid, submissive Isabella. The woman in that room was a true CEO, a born leader. She had managed to silence any doubts that might have existed. In 3 months, she had not only maintained the company's stability, but had propelled it to a higher level. After the productive meeting, Isabella returned to her office, a spacious corner suite on the top floor of the Mendoza Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a 360-degree view of Manhattan. It had been her father's office, and she had now made it her own with a touch of more modern, feminine decor. On her clean, organized desk lay a brown envelope. Mr. Garcia entered and placed a folder beside it. "The final documents from the lawyer, Miss Isabella." "Everything is finalized," he said softly. Isabella opened the envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, ratified by the court. She and James were officially separated. She stared at the document for a moment. There was no pain, no anger, no regret, only an immense sense of relief, as if a heavy burden she had carried for a long time had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Pen in hand, she signed the necessary parts, a signature that symbolically closed a dark chapter of her life. "Any news of them?" Isabella asked quietly as she closed the folder. She didn't really care, but a small part of her was simply curious. Mr. Garcia nodded. The news about James and Tiffany spread quickly in the industry. No major company would hire them. Their careers are over. According to the information I received, James had to sell his car and move back in with his parents in his hometown. Meanwhile, the last we heard of Tiffany, she's working as an administrative assistant at a small firm, far from the glamorous corporate world she dreamed of. Isabella listened without expression. Their fate was the fruit of their own actions. She felt no pity, but no joy either. They were just strangers from her past, ghosts who no longer had the power to hurt her. "So be it. It's no longer our concern," she said, closing the topic forever. That afternoon, after finishing her work, Isabella stood before the large window of her office. The setting sun painted the New York sky in beautiful shades of orange, red, and purple. The city at her feet twinkled with thousands of lights beginning to turn on, like a sea of man-made stars. This was her kingdom, not because she owned it, but because she was a part of it, working hard every day to make it better. She remembered the Isabella from before, the one who was willing to make herself small to win the love of a man who didn't deserve it. She smiled wryly. She had lost a husband, but in exchange, she had found something far more valuable: herself. She found her strength, her intelligence, and her dignity, which she had temporarily misplaced. She learned that true love will never ask you to be less than you are. She didn't know what the future held. Perhaps one day she would find love again, a sincere and mature love that valued her as Isabella Mendoza in her entirety. Or perhaps not. But for now, that no longer mattered. She was whole. She was happy with herself, with her work, with the life she was rebuilding from the ruins. She looked at the horizon, where the last rays of sun were slowly being replaced by the night. But Isabella knew that behind that darkness, a new dawn was always waiting. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she was ready to welcome that dawn, alone. With her head held high and her heart full of hope, the queen had returned to her throne not to rule but to serve, to build, and most importantly, to be a light unto herself.